My son walked into the lawyer's office with that smug little grin plastered on his face, the kind of grin that said he already knew how this story would end. Dustin had always been too sure of himself, too certain that the world bent to his advantage, and why wouldn't he be? For months he'd been whispering in his friend's ears about the $34 million inheritance from his mother, and how his old man, me, would walk away with nothing but empty hands and bitterness. He thought the script was written, the ending already sealed. But life doesn't always follow the script. When the lawyer cleared his throat and read out a single sentence, the kind that fits neatly on one line but carries the weight of a bomb, I watched my son's face change. His smirk faltered, then crumbled, and finally collapsed into raw, uncontrolled rage. He shouted so loud the windows trembled in their frames, his fists striking the polished oak of the conference table. In that moment, I realized something. The story wasn't over, not by a long shot. The memory of his outburst still echoed in my head hours later, as I sat in my cramped kitchen nursing a chipped mug of coffee. The steam fogged my glasses, and in that cloud of bitterness, I could almost still see Dustin's twisted expression. But reality snapped back in the form of another mess. The coffee slipped from my hand, shattering against the worn linoleum, scattering scalding liquid and ceramic shards in all directions. Before I could gather myself, Mrs. Henderson's shrill voice erupted from the other side of the thin apartment wall. "Your damn sprinklers are flooding my begonias again, Jerry." 65 years old. And here I was, on my knees, cleaning up after mistakes that weren't entirely mine. That damn sprinkler system I'd installed last month had a faulty joint, one that leaked just enough to make my life hell every third day. I'd tried explaining the repair schedule to Eleanor Henderson, but she wasn't the type to hear reason. She lived for the argument, her voice sharp enough to cut through plaster and patience alike. I pressed the dish towel to the spreading puddle, muttering curses under my breath. Then came the ringing, the phone, shrill and insistent, cutting through Eleanor's tirade and my weary silence. I ignored it at first, let the machine get it, but the ringing didn't stop. 4 times 5. By the 5th my nerves were frayed. I tossed the soaked towel into the sink and snatched up the receiver. "Jerry Flores speaking. Mr. Flores, this is Janet Morrison, from Morrison, Welsh and Associates in Cheyenne." Her voice carried that cool, careful tone lawyers and bankers always had. The tone that usually meant bad news was about to drop. I stiffened, hand tightening around the receiver. "I'm calling regarding Brianna Elizabeth Flores." The name struck me like a hammer. Nobody had spoken her full name around me in 15 years. Not since the divorce. Not since we'd carefully excised each other from our lives like removing a tumor. My throat went dry. "What about her?" I managed. "I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Flores passed away on Tuesday evening. The funeral service is scheduled for this Friday, at 2 o'clock, at Riverside Memorial Chapel." I sank into the nearest chair. The wood creaked under me, the sound obscenely loud in the stillness of my kitchen. Tuesday evening. That was 3 days ago. 3 days while I'd been fussing over sprinklers, over coffee stains, over meaningless scraps of daily life, while the woman I'd once promised forever to was laid in the ground. "Mr. Flores, are you still there?" "Yes." My voice sounded foreign, like someone else's. "I'm here." There was a pause, then the kind of polite, professional aftershock only lawyers know how to deliver. "Your name was listed among Mrs. Flores's personal effects. You were still noted as her emergency contact. I understand you were previously married." Previously married. The words burned. 22 years together, reduced to a line in a file, a legal footnote, something a stranger read off a sheet of paper. "Yes," I said flatly. "We divorced in 2010. The word slipped out of her mouth so easily, so professionally, that it didn't even register at first. "Beneficiary." My tongue shaped it silently, like testing the weight of a foreign coin. Brianna had built her empire long after I was gone, after the divorce had drawn a clean, brutal line through our lives. I'd read the articles, skimmed the headlines, her consulting firm expanding into something international, her face appearing on glossy business magazines. I never bought but always noticed at the grocery store checkout. She had done it without me, and I never resented her for that, or at least, that's what I told myself. So why would she leave me anything? What part of her carefully curated empire could possibly have my name written on it? Mr. Flores, the lawyer's voice pulled me back, smooth and steady, as if she'd said this 100 times before. Will you be attending? I stared past the kitchen window where Eleanor Henderson was now inspecting her drowned begonias like a crime scene investigator. She stood with her fists pressed into her hips, muttering curses into the damp September air, but her voice sounded far away, muffled, like I was listening through water. Her grievances belonged to another world. The chapel, I heard myself say, slow and mechanical, like someone else had taken the wheel of my voice. Which one did you say? Riverside Memorial on Grand Avenue. The service begins at 2. There will be a brief reception afterward. The reading of the will is scheduled for 4:30. Downtown, at our offices. I nodded though she couldn't see me. My throat was dry. I'll be there. The line clicked dead. I stayed in the chair for a long time, staring at the phone as if it might buzz again. Tell me it had been a mistake, that Brianna was still alive, still out there somewhere wearing one of her red coats and arguing the world into something better. But the phone stayed silent. The coffee stains on the floor had already set into dark half-moons, stains I should have been scrubbing. But I couldn't move, couldn't do anything but sit and breathe, and let her name echo in my skull. Brianna Elizabeth Flores, each syllable like a stone dropped into water, pulling me unders. The light through the kitchen window slanted low and gold, carrying with it the tiny particles of dust that spun and danced like memories I had tried too long to bury. And just like that, the clock turned backward. It was February, 1987. Snow pressed against the windows of Murphy's Diner, soft and silent, while I hunched in my usual booth, a plate of apple pie cooling in front of me. That's when she stormed in, a red wool coat wrapped around her shoulders, dark hair streaked with snowflakes, eyes like sharpened steel. She wasn't there to eat. She was there to fight. You're telling me you won't even consider female applicants for weekend manager because women can't handle the pressure? Her voice cut clean through the half-empty restaurant, steady and uncompromising. That's the most ridiculous thing I've heard all week. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I couldn't look away. She leaned on the counter, her profile caught in the diner's tired fluorescent lights, cheekbones sharp, jaw set, mouth curved in that particular way that said she wasn't going to back down. She was magnificent in her anger. Part of me prayed the manager would argue just a little longer, just so I could keep hearing the fire in her voice. Ma'am, the manager muttered, tugging at his collar. I didn't mean any offense. Of course you didn't mean offense. She shot back, sliding a card across the counter. You just meant to discriminate. And with that, she turned on her heel, coat flashing like a red banner, and pushed through the door. The chimes jingled, then stilled, and suddenly the place felt emptier, smaller. The air had lost its electricity. I pressed my palm against the window, watching her cross the icy lot to a beat-up blue Honda Civic. She moved with care, checking mirrors twice before she pulled into traffic. Careful, precise, a fighter, but not reckless. That one's trouble, the manager muttered behind me, loud enough for the stragglers in the booths to hear. I slid a $5 bill next to my half-eaten pie and stood. No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my own voice. That one's extraordinary. The business card lay abandoned on the counter, her name stamped in clean black ink. Prana Chen, business consultant. I memorized the number on sight, then shoved my hands into my jacket and stepped into the February night. It took me 3 days to work up the courage, 3 days rehearsing lines into the mirror, 3 days staring at the phone like it was a loaded gun. When I finally dialed, she answered on the second ring. Brisk, professional. Prana Chen. This is Jerry Flores, I said, heart-hammering. We haven't met formally, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner on Friday night. There was a pause then. Light laughter, like wind chimes over glass. The man with the apple pie who defended my honor to the manager, she teased. You heard that? I was out at my car getting my gloves. I heard it, I admitted. You left a good tip, too. I could hear the smile in her voice. So Jerry Flores, she said, what can I do for you? I took a breath. Have dinner with me somewhere better than Murphy's. Another pause, longer this time. I could imagine her weighing me, testing me. Are you asking me on a date? She asked at last. Or do you need business consulting? Definitely a date. Though I added quickly, if you have any advice about convincing beautiful women to say yes, I'll take the consultation. She laughed. Not that tight, polite laugh women sometimes give to soften a man's ego, but a real one, full-throated and alive, the kind that made heads turn at nearby tables. Saturday night, she said, without hesitation. Romano's on 3rd Street. 7 o'clock. I showed up early, nervous as hell, and when she walked in wearing that same red coat, with a black dress beneath it, that made my pulse thunder in my chest, I knew I was done for. We ordered pasta, neither of us touched much, too caught up in talking. 3 hours vanished in what felt like minutes. She told me about her childhood in California, her first job out of college, how she hated small talk, but could spend hours dissecting a good book or a bad movie. I told her about my work at the power plant, about growing up in Wyoming, about how I fixed a leaky faucet once and ended up flooding my entire apartment. She laughed so hard at that story she had to dab tears from her eyes. That's when I knew. I was already falling. 6 months later I proposed in the same diner where we first crossed paths, the same counter where her business card had waited like fate. I slid a ring box across the sticky laminate and asked, "Marry me, Prayana Chen. Make me the luckiest man in Wyoming." She didn't even let me finish before she said yes. Our wedding came on a September day so clear, so golden, it felt like the sky itself was blessing us. Prayana wore her grandmother's lace dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and carried wildflowers we'd picked together that morning. My hands shook as I slipped the ring onto her finger. "Forever," she whispered against my ear, and I believed her with all my soul. 2 years later, Dustin arrived, red-faced, squalling, utterly perfect. In the hospital room, I watched Prayana cradle him, her exhaustion mixing with that fierce determination she carried into every battle. I remember thinking, this is it. This is all I'll ever need. A wife who challenged the world and a son who gave my life meaning. It was the perfect moment, and I wanted it frozen in time. But even there, in that sterile hospital room, I noticed how her eyes wandered to the business magazine someone had left on the nightstand. She scanned articles about mergers and market forecasts, while Dustin slept in her arms. At the time, I told myself it was nothing, just her restless mind at work. The years passed quickly. Dustin grew from a toddler into a sharp-eyed boy who mimicked everything Prayana did. On his 7th birthday, she bought him a computer, not a toy, but a real machine worth more than I made in a month. "He needs to understand technology," she said, kneeling beside him as he clicked confidently through programs I didn't even recognize. "The future belongs to kids who think digitally." I half-joked about teaching him to fish instead. She laughed, but it wasn't kind. By then we had moved to Hillcrest Avenue, to a house with polished floors and a kitchen island bigger than our first apartment. Prayana's consulting firm had just landed a lucrative contract with a mining consortium, and suddenly, money flowed like water. We had a housekeeper who came twice a week, a fridge that dispensed ice through the door, furniture that looked too expensive to actually sit on. Dustin's room resembled a showroom for toys and gadgets. "Isn't this wonderful?" Prayana asked one night, sweeping her hand across the glittering dining room with its crystal chandelier and table long enough to seat 12. I tried to smile, but I missed our scarred old kitchen table, the one stained with Dustin's crayons, the one we'd leaned on during late-night talks when the world was simpler. This new table reflected light like a mirror, every fingerprint a sin, every glass needing a coaster. The entertaining began soon after. Business associates, potential clients, couples whose conversations orbited around hedge funds, venture capital, and investment strategies. I wore my best shirt, tried to follow along, but the language of markets and percentages left me lost. like I was speaking a broken dialect no one wanted to hear. Jerry works at the power plant, Brianna would say when someone asked, and I caught a note in her voice I hadn't heard before. Not pride, apology. Dustin thrived in this new world. At 10, he debated programming languages with Brianna's tech-savvy friends. At 12, he critiqued the wine lists at restaurants I couldn't afford alone. By 14, he rolled his eyes at the mention of camping trips, preferring to accompany his mother to business conferences in Denver and Salt Lake City. "Dad doesn't understand" became his refrain, sighed with the practiced exasperation of someone who believed he'd outgrown me. The first real fight came on Dustin's 15th birthday. Brianna had planned a party that looked more like a corporate networking gala, catered food, hired entertainment, and a guest list full of business contacts and their children. I'd wanted something simpler, a barbecue in our backyard maybe, with his school friends. "This is embarrassing," I told her the night before, watching servers arrange centerpieces of white lilies and crystal vases. "He's 15, Brianna, not 50. She barely looked up. "He's growing up in a different world than we did, Jerry. These connections matter. These relationships will shape his future. What about just being a kid?" I pressed. She turned then, and I caught something new in her gaze. The warmth I'd fallen in love with had been replaced with calculation, cold and sharp. "Being just a kid is a luxury we can't afford to give him. The world is competitive. Either we prepare him to win, or we prepare him to lose." I thought about my own 15th birthday. Fishing with my father. A lopsided homemade cake. Presents wrapped in newspaper comics. That was my childhood. Simple, imperfect, but unforgettable. When Dustin turned 10, I wanted him to feel the same kind of warmth. That sense that happiness doesn't need to be bought. It can be built. And for a fleeting moment, I thought we had nailed it. The party was lively, kids laughing in the backyard, the cake messy but devoured. By my measure, it was a success. But by Brianna's standards, it was a failure. She saw it as amateur. Within a year, her version of perfect replaced mine entirely. Her parties became spectacles. Polished, curated, more like networking galas than birthdays. Dustin unwrapped gifts that reeked of serious money, sleek laptops, designer jackets, a mountain bike that probably cost more than my first car. Brianna thrived in those rooms, her laughter echoing, her presence magnetic, and Dustin played his part flawlessly. I watched him shake hands like a miniature executive, reciting lines she had drilled into him. He looked the part, confident, worldly, untouchable. But one night, I caught him off guard. He was standing by the pool, alone, his shoulders sagging, staring at the water as if he wished he could fall in and vanish. "You okay, buddy?" I asked quietly. He straightened in an instant, slipping the mask back on. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? His smile was smooth, but his eyes told on him. For a split second, I saw the boy beneath the armor, just a kid, confused and tired of pretending, and it broke something inside me. That was the beginning of the end. Though I didn't see it then, what followed felt like watching a landslide from the bottom of the mountain, slow, relentless, impossible to stop. Over the next 10 years, Brianna's business consumed her like a fire that never ran out of fuel. Family dinners turned into takeout eaten in silence while she paced with a Bluetooth headset. Vacations dissolved into cancellations, each replaced by urgent client matters. Dustin's baseball games, school plays, award ceremonies, they all competed with board meetings. And the board meetings always won. Whenever I spoke up, she'd cut me off with the same cold line. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. This business supports our lifestyle. Someone has to make the hard choices." But I did understand pressure. I'd spent decades working in power distribution, making sure thousands of people had light when they flipped a switch. I knew what it meant to carry responsibility. The difference was, my pressure wasn't about me. Hers always was. By the time Dustin graduated high school, I barely recognized him. Brianna had sculpted him into her masterpiece, sharp-tongued, ambitious, and dismissive of anything that didn't serve his future. One night, I suggested he at least consider a trade school, to keep his options open. His look of disgust burned into me. Dad, that's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding you back. You settled for mediocrity. I won't make that mistake. 17 years old, and already speaking like a consultant on retainer. Those words, they didn't just sting, they knocked the wind out of me. Mediocrity. That's what he thought of me. 25 years of keeping the lights on for this town, of showing up for him in ways no corporate title ever could, reduced to mediocrity. College only deepened the divide. He chose business school, Brianna's alma mater, naturally. Each holiday visit, he returned sharper, colder, armed with buzzwords about market dynamics, optimization, efficiency. He looked at our house, our traditions, our values, like they were relics from some outdated museum. His contempt wasn't hidden anymore. You could do more, Dad, Dustin would say, over and over, as if my satisfaction with a steady life was proof of weakness. His words carried the cutting edge of judgment, sharpened by Brianna's constant influence. Mom started with nothing and built an empire. You've had the same job for 20 years. He spoke it like an accusation, as if stability was a crime, as if love and presence weren't enough. I would answer him the only way I knew how. Some things matter more than money, son. But by then, he'd already tuned me out, eyes glazed over with the same impatience his mother once showed when she thought she'd outgrown me. The breaking point came during his senior year. By then, Brianna was consumed by a deal so massive, she was practically living out of her office. 100-hour weeks, endless calls, midnight emails. Her empire demanded everything, and she gave it freely. That left me holding the pieces of a home she no longer seemed to notice. The grocery runs, the laundry piles, the quiet meals at a table meant for 3. I tried to keep things steady, but I was already playing defense against an unstoppable tide. When Dustin's graduation arrived, the moment every parent dreams about, she missed it. Another client emergency, another hard choice that left me standing alone in the bleachers as our son received his diploma. That night, when she finally stumbled home near midnight, still in her suit, still clutching her phone like a lifeline, I said the words that had been burning in my chest for years. This is enough, Brianna. Family has to come first sometimes. She didn't even look up. Fingers still flying across her phone, she dismissed me with a voice colder than the marble countertops she leaned against. Don't you dare lecture me about priorities. Everything we have, everything Dustin's accomplished, exists because of my work. I snapped then. What about everything we've lost? That made her pause. At last she raised her head, eyes sharp, puzzled, almost offended. Like what? Like us, I said. Like being a family instead of a corporation. She stared at me for a long moment, and I swear I saw the last thread between us snap in her eyes before she even spoke. We're not a family anymore, Jerry. We're a business arrangement, and maybe it's time we stopped pretending otherwise. Her voice was calm, but the words gutted me. The divorce took 6 months, efficient, surgical, devastating. Her lawyers cut me down to size with the precision of people who'd done this 1,000 times. I got the house on Maple Street, our starter home, the one she'd long ago relegated to rental property, and enough money to live modestly. She took everything else. The company, the empire, and most painfully of all, Dustin. You're holding him back too. Dustin told me the last time we spoke before he moved to Denver to join her firm. His words were laced with pity and disgust. All this guilt about family values and simple living. It's toxic, Dad. I can't be around that negativity anymore. I never argued. There was no point. He was hers now, body and soul. And so I sat, alone in an empty house, filled with the ghosts of a life I thought had mattered. Surrounded by boxes of old photographs, baseball mitts, birthday cards and memories no one else seemed to value. To them those years were dead weight. To me they were everything. Now 15 years later, I sat in my small apartment, staring out at the fading afternoon light. My coffee had gone cold. Shards of a broken mug still littered the floor where my hands had shaken earlier. Somewhere across town, they were preparing a funeral for the woman who had once promised me forever. And for reasons I couldn't begin to fathom, she had remembered my name in her will. The 3 days between Janet Morrison's phone call and the funeral blurred together like a half-remembered dream. I cleaned my apartment twice, pressed my only good suit, rehearsed imaginary conversations that would never happen. Every morning, I considered not going. Every evening, I resolved that I would. Whatever had been broken between us, I still owed her this much. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of Wyoming May weather that sinks into your bones. I stood before my bathroom mirror, adjusting a tie I hadn't worn in 5 years, wondering what Brianna would think of the man staring back, silver-streaked where brown once was, lines carved across my face, each one a map of quiet disappointments. I shook his hand, firm and steady, and noted the weight of his gaze. The service had been dignified, perhaps even beautiful, in its own restrained way. Brianna would have approved. She had been meticulous about her final arrangements, down to the choice of hymns and the flowers by the altar. She had always believed that the way we left this world should carry the same precision as the way we lived it. As the chapel emptied, pews creaking under the shuffle of departing mourners, Dan lingered. He was deliberate about everything, and when he finally spoke, his words carried the gravity of someone who knew what came next would alter the air around us. "I wonder if I might have a word with you and Dustin," he said quietly. "There are some matters we need to discuss regarding Mrs. Flores's estate." Before I could respond, Dustin materialized at my shoulder, his mask of grief slipping almost instantly into keen alertness. "Dan, finally. I was wondering when we'd get to the business side of things." Dan inclined his head, unflustered. "Of course, Dustin. These matters require careful attention." His voice carried the kind of authority only a man accustomed to breaking news of inheritances or deaths could cultivate. "I'd like both of you to come to my office for the reading of your mother's will." Dustin's eyebrows shot up, incredulous. "Both of us? Is that really necessary? I mean, he's not—" He gestured toward me with a dismissive flick. A son who had already decided I didn't belong in the picture. Dan's tone sharpened just enough to silence him. "Your father is specifically named in the will, Dustin. His presence is required by law." The words landed like a jolt. Named in the will. I had expected nothing more than a passing mention, perhaps a legal note severing ties or forgiving some old debt. The idea that Brianna had deliberately written me into her final testament felt improbable, almost absurd. "I don't think that's necessary," I murmured, more to myself than to them. "I'm sure it's just a formality. You don't need me there." Dan's gaze caught mine, steady, unyielding. "I'm afraid I do, Mr. Flores." Mrs. Flores was very specific about who should be present for the reading. "Both you and Dustin must be there." His voice had that subtle finality, the kind that brooked no argument. Dustin's jaw tightened, annoyance flashing across his face. Still, he shrugged. The casual arrogance of someone convinced the outcome would favor him regardless. "Fine. Let's get this over with." Then, with a glance sharp enough to cut, he added, "Try not to make this harder than it needs to be." The three of us walked through downtown Rock Springs beneath a sky streaked with fading light. The buildings stood like sentinels of another era, their facades whispering stories of booms and busts tied to the energy trade. Dan, ever the professional, filled the silence with neutral small talk, observations about the weather, the service turnout, carefully sidestepping the gravity of what lay ahead. His office occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian house, its carved woodwork and leather-bound volumes projecting the authority of old money and lasting influence. Diplomas and framed photographs of Dan with governors and senators lined the walls, their watchful eyes seeming to bear witness to every secret unveiled within these rooms. It was precisely the kind of setting Brianna would have chosen, respectable, elegant, commanding without being ostentatious. "Please, have a seat." Dan gestured toward 2 leather chairs in front of his imposing mahogany desk. Dustin immediately took the seat nearest to him, a subtle statement of proximity and importance, leaving me the one set slightly apart. A fitting metaphor, I supposed, for my role in this fractured family narrative. Dan slid behind his desk, unfolding a thick file with ritualistic precision. The late afternoon light streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that floated like restless spirits between us. When he spoke, his voice carried the solemn cadence of someone not just delivering legalese, but ushering us into an irrevocable moment. This is the last will and testament of Brianna Elizabeth Flores, executed on March 15, 2024. My heart clenched. Only 14 months ago. Why had she felt compelled to change her will then? Illness, a revelation, some lingering shadow she had anticipated. Dan continued, every word carefully measured. He spoke of Brianna's soundness of mind, her deliberate choices, her unwavering clarity. Dustin leaned forward, his body coiled with expectancy. I could almost feel the hunger radiating off him, the eagerness of a man waiting to grasp the empire he had long considered his birthright. The first bequests went as expected. To Dustin, the family home at Hillrest Avenue, with all its contents. Dustin's lips curved into a thin smile. The property alone was worth nearly $1 million, and with it came prestige, the perfect backdrop for entertaining clients and politicians alike. Then came $500,000 in cash, a substantial fortune, yet I saw the flicker of calculation in Dustin's eyes. That sum, though generous, was only a fraction of Brianna's holdings. Where was the company, the empire? When Dan mentioned conditions, Dustin's composure cracked, his knuckles whitened against the armrest. Conditions? What kind of conditions? And what do you mean the company could be sold? Dan, ever steady, adjusted his glasses. I'm simply reading your mother's words, Dustin. The tension thickened, heavy as smoke. Even I found myself leaning forward, though I had intended to remain a ghost in the room. And then, the moment that split the world in two, Dan turned the page and looked directly at me. His expression was not neutral now, but weighted, careful, like a surgeon about to deliver devastating news. To my former husband, Jerry Michael Flores, he paused, then spoke the words that detonated in the silence. I bequeath the sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio. The room spun. My breath caught. The number didn't belong to me, didn't belong in my universe of overdue bills and second-hand furniture. 33 million. Dustin shot up, his face blotched crimson, disbelief turning instantly into fury. What did you just say? But Dan was relentless. He read on, his voice steady as stone. Additionally, I transfer to Jerry Flores controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiaries, real estate holdings, and assets. This includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities, and appointment as chairman of the board. I felt the floor tilt. The empire Brianna had built, the very thing that had driven us apart, the fortress of ambition that had crushed our marriage, was now being handed to me. Dustin's voice exploded. Impossible. She would never. You must have tricked her, manipulated her when she was sick. I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years, I whispered, though even my own voice sounded foreign. Dan cut through Dustin's rage like a blade. Mrs. Flores underwent a competency evaluation. There is no question of her state of mind. These were her clear, deliberate wishes. Still reeling, I managed only one question. Why? Why would she do this? Dan stacked the pages neatly, his movements almost ceremonial. His eyes lifted to mine, heavy with knowledge. She left instructions for that, Mr. Flores. Very specific instructions. Not just the money. No, what Brianna had given me was something far greater than wealth. She had restored my worth, both in her eyes and, maybe for the first time, in my own. Dustin broke the silence first. His voice was low, stripped of its earlier confidence. This isn't over. The fire was gone, replaced by a desperate ember of defiance. I can contest this. Mental incapacity, undue influence, fraud. There are ways to challenge a will. I turned to him and really looked at him. Not the polished heir, not the calculating businessman in waiting, but my son. A man who had grown up expecting the world to bend for him, who had never learned that some things could not be inherited, bought, or demanded. Love, respect, character. They had to be earned. You could try, I said softly. Not as a threat, but as a truth. But your mother was right, Dustin. You're not ready for this responsibility. His laugh came out sharp and hollow. And you are? You're a nobody, Dad. A retired power plant worker with no business experience, no connections, no clue how to run a company worth hundreds of millions. For a moment, the old Jerry stirred inside me. The man who had spent years shrinking in Brianna's shadow, who had carried the weight of inadequacy like a second skin. That Jerry wanted to nod, to agree, to accept Dustin's insult as truth. But then I heard Brianna's voice in my mind, clear as if she stood beside me. You deserve every penny. I rose slowly from my chair, meeting my son's gaze without flinching. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't know anything about running an empire. But I know something your mother valued more than expertise. Dustin narrowed his eyes. And what's that? I know the difference between serving myself and serving others. For the first time his face twisted, not with superiority but with something raw. Rage, disbelief, fear. This is insane. She was sick. She was old. She wasn't thinking clearly. Dan's voice cut through, cold and precise. Your mother was 62 years old, and in excellent health when she signed this will. She underwent extensive psychological evaluation, specifically to prevent challenges like the one you're suggesting. Dustin's voice cracked, almost childlike. Then why? Why would she do this to me? I looked at him, at the boy I had once carried on my shoulders, at the man he had become, brittle and angry, and I felt something unexpected. Compassion. She didn't do this to you, Dustin. She did it for you. She gave you a chance to find out who you are without the crutch of unlimited wealth. I don't want that chance, he roared, the sound echoing with 15 years of entitlement. I want what's mine. I shook my head. My voice was quiet, but it carried more weight than any shout. What's rightfully yours is $500,000 and a house worth nearly $1 million. More than most people ever see in their lives. What you thought you deserved was never yours at all. For a long moment he just stared at me, and in that silence I saw the shift. The realization that the father he had humiliated that very morning was no longer a broken man seeking approval. I didn't need him to validate me anymore. His hands shook as he grabbed his coat. You think you've won. You think this makes you some kind of hero. No, I said, the truth sinking deep into my bones. It makes me responsible. He lingered at the door, suddenly smaller than he had ever seemed before. His final words were strained, almost pleading. This isn't finished. I met his eyes one last time. Yes, it is. It finished the moment your mother made her choice. The only thing left now is what you choose to do with the life she's given you. The door closed behind him, with a soft click, final and echoing. Dan cleared his throat and began shuffling papers, bringing the moment back to earth. There will be accounts to transfer, board meetings to schedule, legal formalities. The management team is excellent. They'll guide you through the transition. I nodded, though my mind was far away. Then quietly, I asked, Dan, did she really love me, even after everything? For the first time that day he smiled, a real smile, warm and human. Jerry, she spoke of you every single time we met. Not about the divorce, not about the mistakes, about you, the man who taught her that success without character is just expensive failure. When I stepped outside, the late afternoon sun felt different, brighter somehow. The air smelled sharper, cleaner. I walked down those steps, not as the man who had arrived broken, but as someone reborn. There would be work to do, responsibilities to shoulder, a company to learn and lead. But for the first time in 15 years, I felt worthy of the challenge. Justice, I realized, isn't about revenge. It isn't about winning, or crushing your enemy, or clawing back dignity. It's about recognition. The recognition that character outlives entitlement, that patience outlasts arrogance, and that real love never truly dies. Brianna had seen that truth, and in her final act, she had given me the chance to prove her right. Dustin came back from his first year of college with sharper suits, sharper words, and sharper contempt. He barely looked at me when he walked in the door. He spoke to Brianna in the polished, strategic cadence of a boardroom apprentice. With me, his sentences were clipped, impatient, as though acknowledging my presence was a waste of valuable time. I had become a placeholder in my own home, the dull backdrop against which their brilliance shone. When Brianna announced she was filing for divorce, she said it like she was canceling a meeting. No tears, no hesitation, just efficiency. She kept the house, of course, and Dustin stayed with her, naturally. I got a one-bedroom apartment across town, with mismatched furniture and silence for company. For years, I lived like a shadow. Holidays were optional for them, birthdays forgotten or postponed. Dustin called only when he needed something: tuition help, car repairs, a down payment on his condo, and like a fool, I gave, hoping each check was a bridge back to the boy who once stood by the pool looking lost. But money doesn't buy back love, not when it's been auctioned off to ambition. The final blow came in the lawyer's office, after Brianna's sudden death. A stroke, they said. 60-hour work weeks finally claimed their due. Dustin was 27, sleek in his tailored suit, and certain the world had finally tilted in his favor. He sat across from me, smug, expecting everything to fall neatly into his hands. The will was read. Brianna left her estate, everything, to Dustin. Not a cent for me. But then came the second document, my will. I had rewritten it years earlier, quietly, carefully. Everything I had, every pension check saved, every stock, every asset, was placed in a trust with rules. Dustin could access it only if he completed one condition. He had to work for 5 consecutive years, in the same power company where I had spent my life keeping the lights on. The color drained from his face. 5 years in coveralls, sweating in substations, climbing poles in the rain, working weekends, being just another name on the schedule. He tried to laugh it off, said he'd contest it, said no judge would let this stand, but my lawyer assured him it would. I had been careful, ironclad, airtight, unbreakable. He could walk away with nothing, or he could take the deal. His choice. For the first time in years, I saw the mask slip. Not the confident consultant, not Brianna's perfect prodigy, just a boy again, cornered, small, angry. You settled for mediocrity, he had once told me. Now, if he wanted what I left behind, he would have to settle for the very same. He would have to live the life he had scorned, taste the sweat, feel the pressure, carry the responsibility. And in that moment, I felt no guilt, no hesitation, just the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. I walked out of that office lighter than I'd been in decades. Revenge hadn't come in a single explosive moment. It had come slowly, deliberately, like rewiring a circuit until the current flowed exactly where you wanted it to. Dustin thought he'd inherited the world. What I left him was the one thing he feared most, my life. And as I stepped into the daylight, I realized something. It wasn't just revenge, it was justice.